Thank you, and thank you to Derek for suggesting the topic that I'm going to discuss today. Very much my focus will be on, like Ian mentioned there, the kind of civic side and the community element, particularly the LCDCs, the local community development committees, and looking at examples then internationally in terms of what other mayoral governance regions around the world have actually done in relation to this area. Because it's 15 minutes, I'm only going to flag up three main examples. So I'm going to press on. Now what I want to do is first of all flag just quickly a side issue based on what, as I say, the earlier speakers have mentioned. Mark actually covered in the LA Times. We actually produce in the IPA a local authority Times, and it's free up on our website under latest news, and it's twice yearly. And when Mark was editor of that production, he flagged up the trial that was actually created, a public trial in 2003, and all 8 members of that jury panel under the chairmanship of Vincent Brown in the King's Inns actually agreed on the whole concept. But a straw poll of the audience actually found out that after the debate they actually went to 59% were actually in favour. But Mark actually noted earlier in the article that on the way in there was a straw poll before the trial and 79% were actually in agreement. So it had fallen 20% by the end of that trial. And as I say, then there was also a kind of a straw poll done on Grafton Street. And again, people were open to the concept, but they wanted it more so in a representational model rather than giving it any decision-making or executive powers. So as we see, we're kind of getting that reflected, as the earlier speakers mentioned, in terms of people moving towards more the chairman role and such like in the council version in the United States now versus the directly elected type mayoral model, and that would be reflected in 2008 and that article that Mark actually wrote in the LA Times at that time. Another colleague in the IPA actually was involved in the colloquium in 2013 in relation to the whole directly elected mayor proposal at that stage. And again, as Mark alluded to earlier in his description of the models, there were 3 options presented, and as we know, the plebiscite never materialised because of the decision to allow the 4 local authorities to decide a majority whether they would allow the plebiscite to go ahead. Again, now here we are in 2016, and as Mark and and Pauline and others have mentioned earlier, it comes back again cyclically, and here we are with the proposal for a directly elected mayor, and whether we're going to question the detail in terms of this model, whether it should have a new authority, an office maybe, in terms of having a sub-deputy mayor, or such like as the international models refer to, like the London model where you have a Greater London Authority. These kind of ideas are there in terms of the minutiae that I see in the examples being proposed. But as I say, the devil's in the detail, and very much as Mark mentioned earlier, we do need more debate around these issues and what is being proposed, because as I say, the people will want to see the detail in terms of, is it an executive model or is it a more representational one that is being promoted, a bit like a more boosted up Lord Mayor of Dublin. So very much, as I say, the proposals as well internationally determine whether it's a 4-year term in most examples, but we're proposing here in most of the proposals I've looked at 5-year term, and it's quite unusual that, because 4 years seems to be renewed by most people in the international models, and it usually becomes an 8-year term for most people. As I say, why? Why now? Well, a lot of the councillors out there, I was looking at some Dublin City councillors, the Dublin councillors' websites, and what I did find was that quite a number of them have flagged up a few examples of why we need a mayor. And one was the M50 Ring Road disagreement that happened recently with the National Transport Authority and Dublin City Council, and whether that maybe the councillors voted for more public transport options rather than the ring road, and if we had a directly elected mayor, they felt that this would actually drive a strategic vision for the city where we could overcome a lot of the nitty-gritty issues that are happening at the moment. The other example flagged up by a lot of politicians was the recent Web Summit moving to Portugal, and that it was all over issues to do with infrastructure and transport access. And if you have these functions under a good, robust, strategic vision under a mayoral office, a lot of these issues may not come to a head like they have in recent years. Now, as I say, Derek asked me to look at the Local Community Development Committee aspect, that is in situ at the moment, and that's another reason why would we actually look at proposing a directly elected mayor, since collaboration is already happening. the local community development committees in each of these 4 regions have actually set out a 2016 to a 2021 plan already, covering the objectives of economic development, local community development, and all the other partnerships that are actually happening there on the ground between these different civic authorities and stakeholders. So we kind of question why. Why would you need a new model over this? Well, I kind of think maybe 2 suggestions. The existing structures, yes, are showing collaboration. It's happening there in the 4 authority areas. But the mayoral idea, or the directly elected mayor office, will provide that strategic vision overarching these and pulling the threads together with greater focus and a key strategic dimension on a lot of these issues and the examples I mentioned earlier. The other side that the international examples are throwing up is that the directly elected mayor is seen as a key touchstone for big business, particularly in the United States and London, where a lot of these philanthropists and massive organisations are fit to collaborate with all the interest groups on mayoral task forces and subcommittees where communities do have a heavy involvement. And the Western Development Committee, or Development in Toronto, is one I'm going to touch on now shortly. So a report I'd have written a number of years ago would have focused on strategic collaboration in local authorities. And you can actually get that free on the IPA website also under our research division. So we've all this free research if you so wish. But Norris and Turrell and Clay would emphasise that the strategic collaboration is the key. It's about the intentionality of that collaboration effort that's going on, rather than just collaboration for collaboration's sake, but that people still remain within their whole spatial areas and in their silos. So it's very important that we actually see strategic collaboration, and I think that's one of the key elements for a DEM being created. Now, it's very, as I say, the intentionality is the key, and that will be very much flagged up by Norris, Turrell and Clay. And these can be seen in the examples of strategic collaboration projects in London. Now, I'm not going to go into the detail because Colin referred to all this earlier about the machinations of the London Mayor Office and the 4-year term, etc. But there are some examples of quite strategic initiatives that have happened under various mayors, and one is the High Street Fund, which was launched in 2015 to re-energise the high streets and to bring in civic crowdfunding platforms. So it's the first time a civic crowdfunding Space Hive website was actually used to pledge money on community projects dealing with high street and, as I say, underdeveloped and underutilised areas in the city. A report was actually published in 2013 as well, prior to this, on the whole development of the culture quarter and its artistic areas, and to create more community emphasis in a lot of these projects in terms of the funding. The other aspect is the recent one called the Mayor's Pocket Park. And these were 100 mini oases that were to be created in London, and actually very much create a vibrancy by bringing in the communities in all these areas where, you know, car parks were developed into green areas. There was culture quarters, pop-up artistic areas and artistic projects. Bridges were revamped into artistic areas also, and most of the projects got between 18 and 20,000 in all these different areas. And as I say, Pocket Park was one of these kind of cross-collaborative initiatives, again, between community and the civic offices, where 78 projects were funded. Again, as Pauline mentioned earlier, the equality agenda on Sadiq Khan's recent 100 days of milestones is something important as well. It has been actually the review of the pay audit in City Hall is something new as well. It has been driven by the vision of the Mayor under key strategic areas. The London Night Tube service and other aspects of transport there that can be developed through the Mayor prioritising a certain number of key strategic areas in his first 100 days in office. And that vision is something that, as I say, a directly elected Mayor can actually bring forward. In Toronto, again, we have another 4-year term Mayor, directly elected, but he also acts as Chief Executive Officer of that city, and very much is involved in a lot of committees. There are 11 committees in Toronto City Council, and he chairs, or his Deputy Mayor chairs, quite a number of those standing committees. And they actually pull in all the key stakeholders and look at all the key areas where actually budget is backed up with what are the priorities of that Mayor of Toronto. As I say, I want to flag up one example from Toronto. It's the Western Development Project, and it was actually brought together a whole area that was underdeveloped to create this artscape, to redevelop a parking lot which was under the Toronto Parking Authority, and to create this community involvement where actually anything that was in public property ownership would have to have a community benefits policy aspect if they're to revamp any public land or public buildings. And that's a new initiative to actually ensure that community are benefiting from a lot of the public land that we have. And I know from NAMA in this country, some sort of initiative along that lines of actually putting down a benchmark could be driven by a directly elected mayor in Dublin to ensure that these derelict sites or houses or such like can be utilised to benefit the community, or a key issue such as our housing crisis at the moment. A mayor would be fit to drive that initiative forward. And as I say, it's a massive development. It's the biggest development in 40 years, driven by this, as I say, cross-collaborative effort by the mayor and all the stakeholders in Toronto. Again, as I say, there's a housing also committee there, and all the key stakeholders, particularly a secretary of a tenants housing association. She is on the main panel there as one of the main instigators on this task force that was set up by the mayor to ensure that all community elements are also shaping and driving the process forward. So very much, as I say, this is a key way that mayor can actually drive initiatives and ensure that there's community interaction and inclusion on those task forces. Another thing is that as we look at cross-sector collaboration, very much it's advocated strongly in Vision Zero, which is happening in the United States at the moment. And what I would say is that there's a wonderful paper called Collaborating Across Departments to Achieve Vision Zero, and it looks at San Francisco, Los Angeles, Washington DC and New York in terms of how the mayor, task forces and subcommittees are actually driving a lot of the initiatives and innovations around a single issue called Vision Zero. And Vision Zero is very much driven to protect people in the cityscapes, whether it be cyclists, pedestrians or motorists, to ensure that we have zero accidents and incidents and fatalities in American cities. While that was happening around a single issue, a lot of new innovations happened with cross-departmental collaboration, which created a transportation database in San Francisco, and a lot of new innovation efforts, such as a marketing budget being used in a cross-collaborative effort, created that many of the agencies, communities and civic authorities actually came together and created joint budgets which lessened the cost and increased their marketing campaign to actually provide the information and marketing aspect to all these projects that were happening. And the stats are reflecting falls in terms of fatalities and other things in this area. But more importantly, the innovations are the key things, that a transportation database is there to ensure that more information is getting out there and that actually information is being shared and the costs reduced in terms of these initiatives. As I say, action plans and subcommittees and task forces are the way to go in terms of strategic collaboration, but led strongly by the mayors in each of those 5 cities. So as I say again, it has to be strategic collaboration, not collaboration for the sake of collaboration alone. As I say also, and it's backed up by the literature, leadership is the key thing. And it's not just leadership in terms of a charismatic leader, as people mentioned earlier, that you create this ego for a politician or a famed business person to actually leave a legacy for themselves. The whole literature, particularly Huxham and Bangan, they would mention it's a leadership challenge to ensure that we create public value, not just an individual legacy by an individual candidate who has developed either in a political sphere or a business sphere. So that's the key issue. And I think that the issue is that you ensure that there are good cross-collaborative and sectoral task forces underpinned by subcommittees, which are usually heavily involved by community groups and voluntary agencies who have advocacy teams on these committees to deal with the issues, but led strategically by a directly elected mayor. And if we do that, I think we'll have some of these types of initiatives here in Dublin. I'm not totally saying that we should go down that route, but what I would say when we're discussing the detail, maybe these examples will provide some instruction in terms of where we're actually going to develop an executive type model rather than just a representational type model. So thank you very much.